Afternoon, everybody. Researcher, like to do lots of cool stuff, especially around SSL. And now that a couple of vulnerabilities happened, just TLS, because everybody's turning off their SSL. This talks about a vulnerability I found in iCloud, which basically allows you to get data that's leaking out of the cloud. And since it's 2014 and every vulnerability has to have a cool logo that's red, here's a cool logo that's red. It's loosely modeled after the Heartbleed logo, but that should be the only time I have to say Heartbleed today, even though this is a TLS talk. So let's start out with a little crypto review. Don't worry, I'm not going to show any elliptic curves or anything like that, like our keynote this morning. But there's three basic types of encryption. There's the symmetric encryption, that's your AES or triple DES. There's asymmetric, that's where you have a private key and a public key. You share your public key with everybody, and they can use that to encrypt to send messages securely back to you. And conversely, they can have a private key, public key pair so that they can authenticate themselves to you, or vice versa. And then the last one's the one-way hash, where it's like SHA, MD5. Each of these different ciphers and crypto algorithms increase over the years and get better. Attacks also increase and get better. So we have to constantly monitor and make sure that we're keeping up with the latest. The other thing is the PKI. That's another thing you need to be aware of, is you can have a site for a certificate for your website. That gets signed by a third party. That can get signed by a third party all the way up to a root. And there's a big group of roots that are trusted by everyone. Right now there's on the order of hundreds of roots and closer on the order of thousands of the trusted issuer CAs. If one of those trusted issuer CAs issues a cert for yoursite.com, then that's what everybody trusts. Everybody will trust it. A brief history for SSL real quick. Back in 94 through 96, versions 1 through 3 of SSL were released. That's a long time ago. TLS 1.0 is basically a slightly morphed copy of SSL after the IETF got a hold of it. Back then, Netscape was the one developing SSL, and they wanted to kind of standardize it in the open standards body of the IETF. And because of that, they wanted to change the name because Microsoft didn't like Mozilla. So they made everybody change the name to TLS. And so we reset the counter back to 1 with TLS. And then later, you get TLS 1.1 and 1.2, which is where all the attackers are going to eventually start focusing on as we get rid of these older versions of TLS. But there's lots of different types of attacks on cryptographic things. So Moxie Marlin, Spike, and Black Hat introduced a thing called SSL strip, and that looks at live HTTP requests and strips off any S's and any redirects that you get. So whenever you go in your browser, you type in google.com. You don't type in https://google.com. You just type in Google. Well, Moxie's tool just took the redirect that Google would send you back to, so where you're searching securely, and removed it. So now all your searches, and if it's a banking site, your banking credentials go over plain text. Another cool thing that Moxie did was to find a thing called, make a thing called SSL sniff, and that allows you to take your evil site and sign for PayPal. And if your crypto libraries aren't working right, then they'll go ahead and trust anything that was signed as long as the signatures, the cryptographic signatures in the chain are unbroken. There's a special thing called ISA-CA, and that's in all the certificates. And if it says false, you're not supposed to trust my site certificate signing your site certificate. So that allows, if your application doesn't do that check, it allows an attacker to go get a cert for a site that he owns and perform a man-in-the-middle attack on all the data that's going to whatever site he's attacking. This is actually still a problem today in iOS and Android apps that choose to do their own certificate validation. Most of the major crypto libraries, like on operating systems for desktops, those platforms, they got it nailed down. If you're trusting the iOS key libraries or the Android libraries, those don't have a problem, but it's where you start messing with the code for SSL validation in your iOS or Android or Windows Phone, any of those mobile apps where you're trying to do things on your own without letting the operating system libraries take care of it. That's where this can present itself today. You move on to attacks on the CAs. So there's lots of different attacks where you can do a DLL rewriting for Komodo and get certs issued. Did you know Tar had a problem where an attacker broke in, found a way around the app that they were using to validate identity and validate sites. They were able to issue certs for Google and VeriSign from a Dutch certificate authority. And the fallout from that essentially shut down that certificate authority completely. And they're not around anymore. The Flame malware that was attacking computers overseas, that used a MD5 collision to be able to get certificates for other domains, and the attackers used that to sign the drivers so that they had a cert from Microsoft so that it would automatically load into the computer and be able to run their malware as a trusted driver from Microsoft. There was also a similar problem with Rapid SSL where an attacker was able to get a cert based off of an MD5 collision there. There's also improper signing by CAs. We call it misissuance. That way, if a CA misconfigures their system like Turkish Trust did back in 2013, I believe, the attacker was able to get a cert from Turkish Trust that was a valid signing cert. So like I talked about, that CA equals true, CA equals false. They set that flag as CA equals true. So anybody that could get that private key was able to then sign certificates for any other site on the internet. But it would chain up to a Turkish Trust root instead of to whatever your normal DigiCert, VeriSign, Symantec routes. More recently, French certificate authority also had a similar problem where it was releasing certs that were able to sign others. There's also attacks on the crypto itself. So we had Beast and Crime that were released at the Echo Party down in Brazil. This allows an attacker to cause your browser to do some sort of behavior where it sends lots of repeated requests to a server, using the server as an oracle for decryption and looking at the errors that gets thrown back. And they're able to essentially divine cookies and login tokens for whatever site you're attacking. And Crime happened to affect all versions of TLS and SSL, whereas Beast, I think, only affected up to TLS 1.0. We had the Leaky 13 attack shortly after that. It was pretty similar. It looked at padding errors instead of bad message authentication codes like Beast and Crime did. And these were talked about yesterday in the OWASP Top 10 attacks, so if you want to go back and rewatch that, they talked a little bit about those. So the fix for these was to turn off any kind of chaining block cipher, which is a special type of encryption that you can do with SSL, and to turn on a stream cipher, specifically RC4. Well, shortly after those attacks were released, another group of attackers came in and started attacking RC4 and found that it wasn't quite as random as it should be, at least in the first couple bytes. And guess where your cookies are whenever you're sending them to a site? They're way up there on the top of the HTTP level. And so it's still fairly theoretical. The attackers were actually able to demonstrate it, but it was in a highly controlled lab environment. And that's a really cool paper if you go back and read that. So more recently, we have Poodle, which is a specific attack on SSL version 3, which remember is over 15 years old and shouldn't be turned on anywhere. Yet it is. So in the Poodle attack, it's another padding oracle attack very similar to the Beast and Crime, where you can steal authentication cookies. This one, though, is a little bit easier to execute an attack against because you can just cause the site to load JavaScript from that domain, and it's pretty trivial to do if you can inject into some other plain text page. So if you're loading up one site over HTTP you can inject JavaScript into that page and force the browser to go to the different site that you're attacking over HTTPS. So that's a history kind of on a lot of the SSL attacks that have happened so far. So let's get to what this is about. So CVE 2014-4449 is a vulnerability that allows access to data in iCloud from the iOS devices. So we've heard about people accessing data from iCloud, specifically like some celebrities. We've gotten in the news for that. Is that what this is about? Was I the guy that did it? No, it wasn't me. But there's also attacks going on in China starting at the beginning of this week, where China, or some entity within China, is man-in-the-middling a lot of the connections that are going to iCloud. Is that the CVE? Probably not again. The celebrity one, it's more likely that that was brute force password guesses. There was a tool on GitHub released to be able to do that, and Apple shut down that avenue by limiting the number of requests that can be made to the iCloud authentication service. This one over in China, that one's most likely, there's a browser that a lot of people in China use, and it'll validate the SSL certificate, but it'll wait and tell the user about it until after they've already gone to the site. So if you start getting man-in-the-middle while you're on that browser, your auth token and everything will be sent to the attacker, and then you'll get notified that, oh, this cert was probably bad, you shouldn't have done that, which by that point it's way too late. So they said sensitive data. So what does that mean? So I was able to prove that at least reminders, meetings, and bookmark information were sent over non-validated TLS connections to Apple. So what that means is Apple in iOS wasn't doing proper validation on the certificate that it received back from the site that it connected to. And if you're a man in the middle and you step in between the iPhone and the iCloud servers, you're able to generate whatever kind of search you want and let the iPhone connect to that, and they'll send you that data. The cool thing about these bookmarks is they also include these bookmarklets, which LastPass and things like that use to be able to store login information for sites. So whenever you click on a bookmarklet, then you can be automatically logged into Google or your bank or whatever you've stored as a bookmarklet in LastPass. So theoretically, somebody getting this information could also go ahead and download credentials for other sites through these bookmarklets. So what does this look like, and how does it work? Great. So this is a tool called Burp Suite. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend getting familiar because it's a really cool tool. There's a free edition and a paid edition. The free edition does a lot of stuff. The paid edition does even more. You can set the iPhone to connect to a Wi-Fi hotspot that you've made. You can make that Wi-Fi hotspot connect all of its connections through this Burp Suite. It acts as a transparent proxy or a man in the middle. Whenever the iPhone starts sending this data to your proxy, then generally you would see all these HTTP connections, which is fine because it's plain text. It goes over the internet just fine. Whether or not these should be HTTP or HTTPS, I'm not really sure exactly what all this means, but it does let you see cookies. But the interesting part is where this HTTPS starts showing up. So if you look at the payload for these HTTPS connections to iCloud, to CalDAV, so that tells me calendar. You can look down here, and it's showing lots of auth tokens. And then there's this thing that says gzip. And if you select all that, you can then take that and send that to the Burp Suite decoder. You see all this. See, the resolution is not such to make it easy to work this. But switch it to text. Go back up here. We want to get, sorry. it started deleting real data. Try this one more time. These live demos are really hard. So basically, you know that this is gzip text, and you want to decode it as gzip, but they've, in the HTTP request, they've mixed it in with plain text. So does everybody know what OA means? That's in binary and ASCII, that's a new line, a carriage return line feed. So we want to make sure that all the ODs and OAs are gone, and then that right there is the beginning of the gzip, or zipped text. So cool feature here, smart decode, didn't work. So we'll tell it to decode it as gzip, and we get plain text. Well, look, list of passwords. So you have a Yahoo password, a LASCON super secret pass for the website, and all of this information that gets synced to the calendar. The other thing that you get is, I'll go back over here, is this MobileMe authentication token. That will allow you to connect to the iCloud site and download more stuff. So there is a company in Russia called Elcomsoft, and they've done a whole lot of research around mobile operating systems, and specifically around the way iCloud works. So they've completely reverse engineered and disassembled the protocol that the iPhone uses to talk to iCloud. So building on their research, you can use this man-in-the-middle attack on all the iOS devices. And basically, so we don't have to worry about this first one, where you're sending in the password, because we don't need the password. We're getting straight to this authentication data, so this MobileMe authentication token here. And if we go against this site, we can request new ones. And so if you need a new authentication token, you don't pass a password, you pass the MobileMe auth token, and then you can get more. You can keep going like that and get backup data. So I haven't actually tried this, so this is entirely speculation from that point forward. But theoretically, you could start passing stuff into the iCloud and get back a full backup of the phone. After you do that, you can load it into a variety of open source software tools and then look at all the pictures, text messages, all the other things that iPhone stores on the iPhone backup. And the cool thing about the backups in iCloud is Apple will store the backup and the key that encrypted the backup. So the backups are stored completely encrypted, that's great, but the key's right here. And Elcomsoft, again, has reverse engineered that process, so you can use their tool to decrypt it. So how do we fix it? Well, there's a lot of things that you can do. One thing that Apple did was started validating the certs properly that they got from the server, specifically for iCloud. But there's a lot of things that you can do on the app and on the server side. So on the server side, you can change the cipher suites. So we talked about how during the Beast and Crime, people switched to RC4, and then the people started attacking RC4, so they got rid of that. Right now, the only types of cipher suites that are actually cryptographically secure are using the protocol of TLS 1.2 and anything that's the GCM, is the Galois counter mode. And all of the modern browsers and operating systems will support that. So you might have to leave some legacy support if you care about legacy users with some of the older protocols and cipher suites. I still recommend getting off of SSL version 3. And then if a member or user calls in, you can walk them through how to update their browser or change the settings in that to where they're using TLS 1 at least. Another thing to do is to turn on what's called femoral Diffie-Hellman. So we had Mr. Hellman here yesterday talking about that. What that provides protection against is a key compromise. So like he had talked about yesterday, if somebody compromises your private key, I'm going to say it heartbleed. So if they were able to get a heartbleed executed and grab the private key, then now they can decrypt all of the traffic that was sent to your site while you were using that private key. And there's nothing that says you have to ever rotate that private key. It's best practice to, but you don't have to. So if that ever gets out, anybody that's been slurping up all your traffic over the last how many ever years you've been using that cert can now decrypt it all. And I know there's somebody that's building some gigantic data center over in Utah that's basically slurping in all of this data. And maybe if they ever find a private key, they might be able to decrypt a good bit of it because people weren't using this ephemeral Diffie-Hellman mode. Another thing that you can do to protect not only desktop but also mobile is to turn on the strict transport security. And that was standardized by the IETF a while back. And now everything except for IE supports it. And Microsoft has said that it's under development. It should be in the next release of the browser. So that's even coming very soon. So Google has it in Chrome, even on mobile for Android and iOS. They've included it in Safari and on the desktop and on mobile, so you can be protected using the mobile Safari. And Firefox and Opera as well have both put it in there. The next step you can take is to do key pinning. So key pinning is the concept of saying, for my website, the only certificate authorities that I want you to trust are this one and that one. So if somebody ever compromises something again like DigiNotar and is able to issue a cert that's trusted by everything else, if you have key pinning turned on, then your app, your browser, for your site will be protected because they would have to compromise the specific certificate authority that you own. So it'd have to be even more highly targeted attack than it would already been. Another good way to protect it, and we had to talk about this yesterday in the morning, is DANE, which is basically the same thing as key pinning, but done out of band over DNSSEC. So you can set an authenticated token in DNS that allows the client browser app to go out and look up a DNS record to say, hey, is this cert one of the ones that I should trust? It'll get the response back, and it'll go and look that response from DNS against the response that it's received from the server. So if you don't receive a response back that matches one of the certs that you downloaded, your app or client can terminate that connection and not allow the user to proceed. So I made a tool that helps in creating the key pins that are used for public key pinning. So this is something that can be used in application libraries or for the desktop operating systems or mobile browsers. You can put it onto your headers. Chrome allows you to manually enter those, so if there's a site that you think that you want to be protected against, but maybe they don't offer key pinning right now, you can add your own key pins for that site by going to this page in Chrome. And that's it's one of the net internals pages. You can select from a drop-down STS. So here's the tool that I wrote a while back. You can just drag and drop a cert into the text box and then click go, and it'll return back some pins that you can use for your site. For this one, you would just put that into Chrome, and it also gives it back in this format. This is the format for HTTP public key pinning. That just went to the working group last call at the IETF, so it's about this far away from being a full-fledged RFC standard for use. And right now it's supported in Chrome and Firefox and possibly Opera. I don't know that for sure. I haven't heard anything from Microsoft on whether or not they'll support it yet or not. Microsoft supports another type of key pinning if you're using their Emmet tool. So in Emmet, you can go into some of the configuration settings and configure it only to trust a certain CA or a certain specific certificate. One of the problems with Emmet, though, is updating it. It's completely manual. Even if you have it deployed in an enterprise, you have to completely redeploy a role set out to image. There's no dynamic updating. And the cool thing about the public key pinning that Google developed for that is it dynamically updates every time a browser goes to the site. And you can inject it into the binary for Google and Firefox. So even the first time they connect to the site, they're still protected from any attackers that happen to get them the first time. or if they clear cookies. With that, that's the talk. That's how you can get all kinds of cool stuff from iOS. Thanks a bunch.